Hello everyone and welcome to Textilers. Okay, this we're training for Azure Easy 900. That's the beginners course. Okay, before we go on, for the benefit of those that are just joining us, my name is Oluwatosin Anishere. I'm a cloud consultant and also a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm an instructor here for Textilers and I train the Azure courses. Although I specialize in both Azure and Microsoft 365. But for this learning, I'll be training on Microsoft's Azure, specifically AZ900, which is the fundamentals. Okay, so let's go through our housekeeping rules. The session will be recorded and this will be made available for virtual viewing, such that those that are currently not with us now can make reference to this recording. Now, kindly mute your mic when you're not speaking. And if you have any suggestion, you can unmute your mic sorry, if you have any contribution rather, or you want to answer a question, you can unmute your mic and speak. You could equally use the raise your hand icon. When I see that, I'll call on you to ask your question, or you can pen down your question until the end of the session where we have the question and answer session. Also, kindly follow us on all our social media handles and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's where we update all the recorded videos and keep you up to date of all our events. Okay, so that's for the housekeeping rules. Before now, we have been going through a series of modules for our AZ900. We have a total of 6 modules where we have gone through each of this module, and today we'll be looking at module 5. So for AZ900, the module stops at module 6, which means after today's training, we have one module to go. So in today's module, we'll be looking at identity, governance, privacy, and compliance. This is a very interesting topic, and I hope you will learn as much as you can from this particular session. Okay, so the module outline for our training, we are going to learn the following. We're going to talk about the Azure Identity Services, in which we'll describe the authentication and authorization, try to understand the difference. We'll talk about the Azure AD, MFA, that's multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, as well as conditional access. We'll look at the Azure Governance feature, where we'll talk about RBAC, resource lock and tags. We'll talk about policy, blueprint, and um, CF. We'll also be looking at, Azure privacy and compliance. We'll talk about the privacy statement and online service terms. So we'll look at the trust center as well as compliance documentation. And finally, we would end this particular module with Azure sovereign regions. At the end of this module, we'll have time to go through the lab to do, some demonstration. So these are the things we have for module 5. Now let's start with the core Azure Identity Service. Okay, this is where we are going to learn the concept of authentication and authorization. Now, in this module, we have the objective domain for Azure Identity Service. Like I said, from the outline, we'll be explaining the difference between authentication and authorization, defining the Azure Active Directory, describing the functionality and usage of Azure Active Directory, as well as describing the functionality of and usage of CA, MFA, and SSO. Now, those are things we will achieve for this training. So let's start with authentication and authorization. When we say authentication, in simple word, it has to do with verifying who you are. Okay, that way you validate a system that is trying to that is accessing by the right person. Now, what I mean is you are a user in your environment, for instance, and you are trying to, log in. Now, when you provide your credential, that concept, what you're basically doing is you're authenticating. That's way the system is going to validate you to be sure you are the right person, or you are part of the organization, or you are probably an employee of the organization. So that way, it's just going to prove if you are a legitimate person, basically. That's what this authentication is all about. And for authorization, it has to do with what level of access or what level of permission do you have. So it's not enough that you have authenticated to gain access into the environment. Again, the question is, what are the things that you have access to within the environment? Let me give this simple scenario. Let's say an organization now, your physical building, you go to the office, in the morning. Before you can have access to your building, probably you need to show off your ID card, just saying. Now, this ID card is a form of authentication, because that way you are verifying who you are. And with that, depending on different organizations, sometimes you have to swipe, this ID card to give you access. Now you have verified who you are, and that way you gain access into the building, for instance. Now, authorization here is now, which department do you have access to? Or I can put it this way to say, what floors? Maybe your building is that building that have about 17 story building, So what floors do you have access to? Or what department floor do you have access to? So that's the idea of this authentication and authorization. And basically, they're also part of the four pillars of identity, you know, this authentication and authorization. So I'm mentioning that because identity itself, which I think we've talked about in our previous training, has four pillars. We have the administration, we have the authentication, we have authorization, and we have auditing. So these two are equally part of the four pillars of identity. And sometimes we shorten this authentication and refer to it as auth-n. Okay, so if you hear auth-n from anyone, or you're reading from a documentation, it's basically talking about authentication, while authorization sometimes is being shortened to auth-z. Okay, so if you see that in any documentation and you hear that, just know that it's being referred to as authorization. So these are the unique um, difference between authentication and authorization. Okay, so let's move on. Next year, we'll talk about MFA. That's the Azure Multi-Factor Authentication. And what do we refer to as MFA? So MFA is, I will call it a second layer security, or I can refer to it as a two-factor authentication. So in essence, when you want to, access your environment or a particular application and all, you need to authenticate, right? That's the providing the first factor. Most of the time, all you have to provide is your credentials, which is your username and your password. Now, the Azure MFA is giving us another security layer, where we now have to provide another level of authentication in some form. Now, this authentication can be something something you possess, and something you are. So when we say something so for instance, your PIN, your password. Okay, so those are something something you can recite by heart, or offhand, if I can use that word. While something you possess, that is something that know that is in your hand. This could be a phone, where you could have the Microsoft Authenticator app on the phone. This can be a smart card, okay, whereby you can use this card with the smart card reader. This can be a token. Okay, those are something that you possess, that you have with you. Now, the next thing here is something you are. Okay, something that is a part of you, a form of biometric. So this can be your fingerprint, this can be retina eye scan, this can be facial recognition, and so on and so forth. So all of these, we refer to them as that's that form where we can provide that second layer security in our environment. So for multi-factor, once again, we have the free edition for MFA, and also if you really want to use the have the full functionality and all, you may need to have license. Either you have a premium 1 license or premium 2 license. Although the MFA is part of the Azure Active Directory features, but then you can have this as a subset. This Azure MFA can be part of your Office 365 subscription, despite the fact that it is an Azure Active Directory feature. So this is what MFA is about. Now, I'm sure you've been hearing me talk about Azure Active Directory, Azure Active Directory. Let's try to understand what is this Azure Active Directory, which is AAD. Now, the Azure Active Directory, basically, I would describe that to say it's a cloud-based identity and access management service. Now, basically, most organizations uses this Azure AD to enable their employees in their environment, or maybe guests in their environment, to be able to sign in, such that once they sign in, they'll be able to have access to resources they need. So I can put it in this way to say the Azure AD enables the employee or guest in their environment to do authentication and authorization, since we understand what these two means. Okay, now having access to resources, these resources can either be internal resources or they can be external services. Now, when we say internal resources, those are maybe application that your organization developed in-house, that is on the corporate network or on the intranet. And for external services, we have the likes of maybe the Azure portal, for instance, or even the Microsoft Office 365, and all of this as application, for example. So in a way, I can just summarize to let us know that the Azure AD basically simplifies that way that our organization manage this authentication and authorization, and it also provides that it gives that room for single identity system for both cloud as well as on-premises, application. That's what this Azure AD does. Now let's take a look at all of these different, you know, what's called services. But before I talk about uh all of this listed on the screen, I'd like us to know that the people that make use of this Azure AD. So depending on the cloud offerings, we've talked about cloud offerings in our previous learning, where we talked about the EAS, PaaS, SaaS, So those are different cloud offerings. And we said this, so based on, we talked about the target audience for these cloud offerings. So in that way, I could say the Azure AD, the people that use the Azure AD, say the IT administrator, that's from the ES aspect, that's infrastructure as a service. This administrator basically uses the Azure AD maybe to control application and resources, depending on their business requirements. Then we have the developers as well, or you want to call them app developers. They also uses Azure AD. Now I'm speaking from the concept of platform as a service. Now they use this to provide a form of standard-based approach in order to add maybe functionality to the application that they have built. Functionality like single sign-on, which I'll still talk about. So we also another person that uses the Azure AD, the online service subscribers. So if you're subscribing to, let's say, any of the SaaS offering, That's the Microsoft 365, Office 365, Dynamic CRM. These are just example of SaaS offering. So yes, because whenever they subscribe to this SaaS offering, automatically they get an instance of Azure AD. So which means automatically they have an Azure AD tenant. So there are also people, or should I say, part of those that uses the Azure AD. And for instance, we can even say users too. Generally, this time around I'm generalizing. Users also, in order to manage their own identity, maybe they are using Azure AD features like password, self-service password reset, for instance, which I think we talked about in previous learning. If not, we're still going to talk about it. They also make use of this Azure AD. So these are the people that make use of Azure AD. Now, let's now talk about what this Azure AD provides. So the services they provide are what we have listed here on the screen, starting from authentication. We've talked about authentication before, so I'm not going to, overflog that. I'll just move on to single sign-on, okay, because I believe we have understanding of authentication. But if we don't, kindly let me know and I would go over it again, but not to just, waste time or drag us back. That's why I said I believe we understand what authentication is already. So let's just move to single sign-on, SSO, single sign-on. Basically, it's seamless, and it makes it easier for us to remember our username and password. Why? Because it uses just one set of credential, like should I say a single identity basically is usually assigned or tied to a user. So take for instance, now I have Tosin, then a single identity is tied to Tosin. Tosin has a credential, which means Tosin has username and password. Now, when Tosin wants to access maybe any resource or any application that I am permitted, I have that permission to access, then there's no need of having different credentials to log into this. With SSO, I can use my same credentials, to sign in to these services. So what do I mean? Let's say I'm trying to sign into portal.azure.com. Successfully, I've been able to authenticate using my username and password. Now, probably there's a particular service like Teams. For instance, within our organization, we are using Teams as well, and I'm trying to, access Teams. Now, there's no need to have a separate credential in accessing Teams. Now, because of the capability of SSO, or because of the service, Azure AD providing services like SSO, there will be no need. I can just use the same credential that I'm using to sign into my portal, or other apps. I would use that same credential to sign into Teams. And I don't know if some of us have observed, probably in our environment, for those of us that are working already, because I understand that we have students here, and even some of the students that their school is using the cloud and using this cloud, you'll observe that after you have signed in, let's even say the browser, for instance, and all, you open another tab and you're trying to sign into another service, maybe within your environment, you would observe that sometimes you do not even require to type in that username and password again. Now, that instance, it becomes seamless because you really don't have to, sign in username and password anymore. Let me see if I can have example of that in such a way. 1 minute. I'm trying to bring up my environment. Okay, so for instance, here, this page here I've assigned it to this portal.office.com, basically for my Microsoft 365 portal, or Microsoft 365 admin center. Now let me try to log into Azure. So once I type portal.azure.com, now take notes. It's not requiring me to sign in. Now, this is what I refer to as seamless single sign-in. Okay, because I really don't have to type my password all over again. Okay, or should I say my credentials all over again? So it's seamless for me, and it's Azure AD capability, so to say. Now, also we have the application management, and this basically just helps us to manage our cloud as well as on-premises application by using Azure AD. So everything is being centrally managed on Azure AD, whether it's our SaaS apps. When I say SaaS, I'm sure we understand what that means right now. That's the software as a service apps, which I can liken Teams to be an example of that. Just saying. Then we can have maybe even our application proxy, or maybe just those kind of thing. We can manage those centrally on our Azure AD. Then we equally have B2B, B2C. Now, both of these, I would refer to them as external identity, so that I can talk about the two at the same time. External identity. And what does this mean, so to say? This external identity is just a set of capability that usually enables our organization to allow access to external users. Please take note of that, external users. That is, users that are not initially part of our organization. So let's assume everyone on the call is working with Microsoft. Oh, sorry, let's use Textilers for instance. Everyone on the call is working, they're part of the organization Textilers, and we want to collaborate, or we have something to do with someone from Microsoft. Now, Microsoft is a unique organization, very different from Textilers, but with this feature of business to business, B2B, we can invite user from, or users, depending on whom you're trying to invite, to collaborate with you in your own textiles environment. So in a way, what I'm saying in essence is the B2B, which we call business to business, the collaboration usually would allow you to share maybe your organization's application, or maybe even your services with guests. These guests are usually users that are not part of the organization, users from a different organization. So in a way, B2B brings a form of collaboration where you can invite guests to your environment. Okay. Now B2C is a little bit different. Okay. B2C, which we refer to business to customer, sometimes you can even call that business to consumer, depending on what the documentation you're reading. Either way, you're fine, you're correct. Now, this is actually a customer identity access management solution, which sometimes we refer to as CM. In a way, it also allows external users, okay, just like B2B, external user to sign in. But the difference here is that for B2C, it will allow external users to sign in with their preferred credentials. So let me give you an instance. Maybe you're trying to you go to a website, okay, and that website requires you to sign up. So rather than trying to sign up, you have to, when you sign up, you have to provide some information like name, information like surname, phone number, address, depending on the different things that you have to fill. And at the end, it will now create for you your credential, username and password, which means that is what you would always use to sign in whenever you go to that website, or whenever you go to that page. Now, for business to customer, what happens is it will allow you to use your own preferred identity, which means I can decide to sign in. I'm sure some of us have experienced, and we can relate with it. Either you sign in using Google, or sign in using Microsoft account. Because you already have a Microsoft account, you can just use something that you prefer. You can sign in using Facebook. Okay, even though the company is now called Meta now. Okay, you can decide to sign in using Twitter, or you can decide to sign in using LinkedIn. So those are your any of these can be your, you know social account that I said. So it's not only limited to social account. I'm sure you will hear me say sign in using Google. Now, those we can refer to them as personal account, or so to say. So with that, you are able to sign up so that whenever you want to access the website, and it's not just website, even application, you use your own preferred, account, whether it's social account or enterprise account or local account, you use your preferred. So that's what B2C allows you to do. Okay. Now the difference between B2C, I don't want to waste time. I need to move on quickly. Is the fact that for B2C, it's being managed in your organization's Active Directory. Okay, so if I have a guest in my account, I manage that guest alongside the users in my Azure Active Directory. But for B2C, it's actually different because B2C, there's a B2C directory, that is the Azure AD B2C directory. Now, this is separated from the organization's employee that you have. Okay, and that's like another difference between B2B and B2C. Now, finally, we have the device management. Okay, and for device management, it has to do with supporting registration for your devices. So in case you're working with an organization and the organization requires that you register your device, so this can be managed on the Azure Active Directory. So you can have Azure AD registered. Maybe you are even bringing your own device. Some organization users are allowed to use their own personal devices, whether it's phone, laptop, to access, the their emails or access on an application and all. So, but you may want to, organization may require that you register that device. Okay, so whether you're bringing your own devices or it's a company owned devices, all of these devices, whenever it's registered, is centrally being managed, within the Azure AD, and that's another service that the Azure AD provides. So let's move on. If you have question, please feel can note it down, put it in the meeting chat, or when we get to the question and answer forum, you can feel free to ask your question. Moving on, let's talk about CA, conditional access. Conditional access. And for conditional access, this is this is more for also for security. The conditional access, I would liken it to, you know, around security as well. So with conditional access, it's also being used by our AAD to bring together and make decision. So before now, the concept before now is okay, when people authenticate, they have access, to different things. But with conditional access, global admin, or should I say admins generally, can control what their users have access to. So what I'm saying in essence is that the conditional access is that capability of our Azure Active Directory that will enable, whether it's IT admin or probably you are the IT admin there in this instance, it will enable you to enforce control on the access to application within your environment, or even control specific condition from a particular central location, so to say. That's another thing that this conditional access lets you do. And don't forget, just like multi-factor authentication, the conditional access is also an Azure Active Directory feature. I'll call it as part of the Azure Active Directory feature. So that's one thing this conditional access does, and it really helps our IT administrator, to be more productive wherever they are, or whenever they need to. And most importantly, I think I want to emphasize that, is the fact that it protects the organization access. Okay, so that's what this conditional access does to us. So we can have when it comes to conditional access, I would liken it this way. There's always this the condition. So before you can use conditional access, you need to be able to create a conditional access policy. Okay, it is this policy that you can enforce on users within your environment, not just users, it could be groups, it could even be guest users, so to say. So you enforce it to, this is just within your environment. So there's always the um condition parts and the action. Now you could have example of when user X is trying to access, let's say, exchange. I'm just picking random now. Exchange, for instance, then require it to do a particular action. That action could be require it to, require MFA from such user. That's like an example of conditional access. I think if you don't mind, I can show us that very quickly. 1 minute, so that I don't just speak offhand. You can also relate with what I was trying to explain. So I can come here and type conditional. Consider Azure the conditional access. So before you can work on that, there's always, you have to create a policy. I'm not sure, do I have access to CA here? Okay, it's great that I think I don't have permission. Either I don't have P2 license or thereabout for this particular directory. Let me try another directory, so to say. I know I have another one. Okay, so let me do, this is another one. The conditional access. Okay, great. So here you can see, for you to create conditional access, first of all, you need to create policy. Okay, and this policy, you would of course give your conditional access a name, and you can, here you have to define who is this talking to. Is it all the users in your environment, or you just want it to apply to specific user? If it's a specific user, you can either select maybe all guests and external user within your environment. You want to be able to control what these external users within your environment have access to, or based on directory role, or you want to put the assignment based on users and groups. So I want to be able to say whenever John Smith is trying to access, maybe let's say this the cloud app and action. 1 minute, that's coming up. So maybe when John Smith is trying to access all the cloud apps, and I may be specific to say, now, what I'm doing, please note that it depends on your business requirements, what you're trying to achieve, what you want to be able to enforce when John Smith is, whatever John Smith is trying to access. So in my instance here, I can decide to say, whenever John Smith is trying to access, let me go through this. Let me just pick anything at random. Microsoft Azure Management, just saying. Okay. So I'm going to put condition in place. So these are the various conditions that we have, and this is where I want to lay more emphasis on. Now, it's not compulsory that I configure all of this. I don't have to configure user risk except it's a business requirement, or signing risks, or device platform location and all. Sorry, because of time, I may not be able to, go to in depth in this. So just saying, our training should we're supposed to finish the training today, but last week was our inspirational session and class did not hold last week. That's why we're doing what we're supposed to do last week today. So next week we have module 6, and that will be the end of our training. However, we may decide to leave just one more training, so that all we do for that training is to do labs. Okay, we won't be having any form of lecture, and anyone that has any question or any issue based on the different labs, step that is being provided, we can talk about it on that day. Okay, just giving us heads up. So let's assume I want to, back to the conditional access, let's assume I want to do it based on location. So I can decide, I can go ahead to configure and say whenever John Smith is trying to access the Microsoft Azure management from let it always be from a trusted location. Okay, then I can go ahead to grants. Now grant is, I may decide to say, okay, before John Smith can have that access, require MFA from John Smith. Now it's not only MFA, I can decide to say, okay, let it be that John Smith is using the hybrid Azure AD joined, which means John Smith device is actually joined to the corporate network in the simple word that we can all understand. Okay, it's on the corporate network. The device is joined. Okay, or I can decide, let it require password change, and also I can require different things based on, or I can decide to say, okay, whenever John Smith is trying to, access that particular Microsoft Azure, may block access for John Smith and all. So depending on what you are trying to achieve. Now we have the session 2. This is coming up. So you can decide to say, okay, based on this, the session is on frequency. So I can say, okay, my frequency here is every 3 days, or I can decide to use a persistent browser session or customize this. So I can select that. And once I'm done, I can turn on this policy to enforce this policy. Okay, and I can leave it for reporting only. So to say, then I click create. Okay, so sorry, I didn't give that a name. Dark stylus. Okay. All right, so it's going to create that policy for us, and that's basically conditional access. So from this diagram here, we can see we've got through this to say, okay, either allow access or block access, and you can use the conditional access basically to require MFA, from users before they can have access to that application or data or any resources within your environment. So this uh, this is about conditional access in a simple way that we can understand. Of course, there's more to conditional access that we can still discuss. I don't know if this particular topic is clear, and I can move on to the next slide. All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about Azure governance methodology. Now for Azure governance methodology, we are going to describe the functionality and uses of this listed on the screen here: RBAC, resource logs, tags, Azure Policy, Azure Blueprint, as well as Cloud App Framework for Azure. And we'll start with RBAC. So what is RBAC? We refer to RBAC as role-based access control. That's RBAC. So it's an acronym for role-based access control. So specifically Azure RBAC, it's more or less, we can use the Azure RBAC basically to segregate duties, okay, within our team, or with the and use that to grant just the amount of access that users need to get their job done. That's a way I can describe RBAC to us. So with RBAC, for instance, you can just grant that amount of access that is needed for users to perform their job. If, for instance, my job has to do with administering or managing VM, so I really don't need too much permission, so to say. All I can get is just that particular permission that helps me to manage VM. Okay, so I can just get just that. I have back access maybe to a specific subscription. So let's assume in our environment we have more than one subscription. We have so many resource group. We have various resources, and what I just need, my job role just requires me to manage a specific resource group in a subscription. Okay, so I really don't need to have access to, just saying, the entire subscription, so to say. I can define and restrict, that my access using RBAC to just the resource group. So let's take a look at this diagram here on the screen. Have my Azure AD, right? And the Azure AD, I have the Azure subscription. Now, it is possible to have more than one Azure subscription. Now, let's assume this particular subscription has different resource group. Don't forget that within the resource group, there are different resources within them, because the resource group helps to house different resources on in our environment. So, and what you need is, you need to give Tosin permission, or what Tosin just need to do is just to manage this first resource group. Now, I really don't need access to the entire subscription, because giving me access to the entire subscription means I would have access to resource group 1, resource group 2, up to resource group N, depending on the numbers of resource group you have in your environment. Now, if my job requires me to manage just resources or services within resource group 1, then you can use the airbag to limit my access. Okay, or should I say, to grant me just that amount of access I need to manage resource group 1. So that's what this airbag, helps us to achieve. And it's also a form of security, because that way you'll be granting access maybe to specific user or specific group, or even application at a certain scope. Remember, this different scope that we talked about, from management group to subscription to resource group, and down to resources. So based on scope, I would have access to that. So that's for Harback. Let's move on. Let's take a look at resource lock. What do we understand by, or what is resource lock, so to say? The resource log is another, should I say, important functionality, because with this, it helps administrator to be able to create, update, as well as delete resources in an Azure account. So what that means is, our admin can use this resource lock feature um, to prevent any accidental delete or any changes of resources within the environment. So let's also take, for instance, again, we are all in what's it called? Textilers organization. And within Textilers organization, we have different resources, we have different services. Now, without resource log, it's possible that users can just modify, or admin that have equally have access to a particular resource can just go ahead to modify and make changes to the resource, or even go as far as deleting. Now, this may be accidental, and it can even be on purpose, deleting your resource. But with resource lock, you can manage, or you can use it to prevent, such resources from being accidentally deleted, or from being modified, basically. So resource lock comes about, it forms about, let's say, protection for our resources in our environment. And of course, the resource lock has levels. We have something called resource lock level, or we can even call it resource lock type. Now, this resource lock, whether level or type, we can either set it to cannot delete, or we can set it to read only. Okay, so this type cannot delete. Basically, what it means is authorized users will be able to read, that is, they'll have view um, capability. They'll be able to make changes, they'll be able to modify resources, but they will not be able to delete. And that's why you can see here, read, update, delete. So they'll be able to read, they'll be able to modify, make changes, updates, but they will not be able to delete. Now, for read only, just as the name implies, what this lock specifies is authorized users will be able to read, but they would not be able to make changes, neither would they be able to delete, So you can always apply this lock to all your authorized users that have maybe permission to the environment. You can give them maybe read only as the lock type, or cannot read, depending on what you are trying to let them achieve. Now, please note that whenever you apply maybe a lock at the parent scope, maybe all resources within that scope will inherit the lock, for instance. Okay, that's one thing I would like us to note. And with resource manager, this resource manager lock, we can apply maybe only to operations that happen in the management plane as well, just for us to understand further. So these are the types of lock we have, and I believe, don't forget, it's just to prevent modification or accidental delete of our resources in our environment. That's what the resource lock does. Now let's talk about tags. Tags. What are tags? Okay. So basically, when we say tags, it just gives us this, we can call it resource tag too. It's there are things, there are tags basically that we can apply to our Azure resources, and the essence of this is just to logically organize uh these resources by putting them into different categories. Okay, so each tag, whenever you have tag, each tag basically will contain the name and the value. Okay, whenever you have tag, you can see this name and value. So that's how we have tag. And whenever you create your tag, you can associate this your tag with the appropriate resources. So with tag in place, when you have tag in place, it is easier for you to retrieve all resources in your subscription using that tag name, okay, or even the tag value, which means you'll be able to retrieve any related resource from your different resource groups. So tag has its own advantage. So let's assume we have resources in our environment and we've tagged this resource based to maybe billing data and all. We can easily, you know, retrieve all of these resources that has billing data on them. So it's easier to help organize, and that organizing is on different category. And one thing about tagging is whenever you're tagging your resource in your environment, you can have within Azure now, you can have a maximum of 50 tag names as well as the value pair. Remember, you have to put tag name and value. So you can have up to 15. And of course, your tags that are maybe you apply them to resource group are not inherited by resources in that resource group. So it doesn't work that way, which means that's about tag. But if you do it at the parent level, of course, they get to inherit the tags. So that's about tags. Let's move on to Azure Policy. Azure Policy. What is Azure Policy? Now, Azure Policy, basically, just like we have listed here on the screen, we can use it to enforce standard as well as access compliance across our organization. That's one thing that we can use Azure Policy to do. So another thing that we can use Azure Policy to do is basically we can use policy to evaluate whether maybe properties of resources matches with business rules. Okay, let me give us an example of how this policy can work. Let's say in an environment, okay, we have our IT admin have access, or global admin, or whichever admin that we have configured the environment, they have access to create VMs. Okay, we can set policy in place, maybe to manage our cost. That okay, the VM, put a policy in place on the types of VM that can be created. Maybe all those expensive VMs like N series and all, you can restrict that with policy. I don't know if you understand now what I'm explaining, please, for policy. So these are things that you can do with Azure Policy. So in essence, I'm trying to say the Azure policies would usually focus on the resource property, especially when you're doing their deployment. And you can also use Azure Policy for any existing resources. Okay, that's what which is where I was trying to explain to us with that example I gave earlier, that we can have this policy to ensure that users in our environment deploy just a specific type of VM. And the purpose of us doing that is we want to be able to manage the types of VM that users are creating in our environment. We don't want users to go ahead to just create any type of VM. We're just restricting the type based on cost, because the goal here is we're trying to manage costs. I don't know if that makes sense to us. And one thing I would like us to know with Azure policy is that by default, it will allow system, that is, it allows you to set the properties of Azure resources just to fit to the requirement by default. That's what this Azure resources does. Okay, so like what we can see here on the screen, it says evaluate and identify Azure resources that do not comply with your policy. You can provide built-in policy initiative definition under categories of, these different core services: the storage, networking, compute, security center, as well as monitoring. So that's Azure policy. Now let's try to understand blueprints. Now, what is blueprint? Let's, before we talk about Azure blueprint, just trying to understand blueprint, so to say. Now, for blueprint, it's is more or less like a standard design, or I'm trying to see a proper definition that can, put this to make more sense to us. Okay, so for blueprints, basically, I would say, okay, let me put it this way. I'm just trying to make see what would make sense to us. It's what architects use, to have a standard in place, okay, such that subsequent building or whatever that we have, it can follow in line with that blueprint. Now, when we bring it to Azure now, it gives us that way to define maybe reputable set of Azure resources. And with this blueprint, it will now enable our team or admins to rapidly provision any new environment that's based on the knowledge that is in line with compliance requirements. That's what blueprint does. So in a way, I'm just saying that the blueprint basically is that declarative way that we use to orchestrate deployment of various resource templates, as well as maybe other artifacts within our environment. Now, this include role assignment, this include policy assignment. Our blueprint includes Azure Resource Manager template, Azure Resource Group as well. Now, the good thing about blueprint is we can use this blueprint object to replicate multiple Azure region. That's another great thing we can use this blueprint for. So let me see, another thing that we can talk about for Azure Blueprint is the fact that with Blueprint, when let's say we have this cloud, we can implement Blueprint in different steps, such that whenever we create Blueprint in our environment, we can assign that Blueprint and even track a particular Blueprint, assignments within our environment. And each component in our blueprint is what we refer to. Each component in our blueprint, we refer to that as artifacts. Okay. And whenever it's possible that we can have artifact to have maybe known configuration in a way. So just depending on what the business requirement have for us, that's for blueprint. Now, next here is cloud adoption. Azure, the cloud adoption framework for Azure. Now, for the cloud adoption framework for Azure, this provides us with that guidance, that helps us from our on-premises and take us through our cloud adoption journey. That's what this framework does. It will help us to create and implement all the business, what's it called, businesses and technology strategy that we need to succeed. Okay, that's our cloud adoption framework. So in a way, the cloud adoption framework again, I can refer to that as, that's documentation. I can say it consists of documentation, it consists of maybe implementation, including best practices as well as tools that is specifically designed to help organizations in order to implement the strategies again needed to succeed in the cloud. That's the main goal, and that's why I'm laying emphasis on that. And the cloud adoption framework, it provides this proven as well as this consistent methodology for implementing cloud technologies. So there's one thing, we have this life cycle when it comes to the cloud adoption framework. And here we can see that from we have the strategy, we have the planning, we have the ready, we have migrate, such that for migrate we have that's even the migrate here. I would specifically say that is the adoption part, that migrate, innovate, and underlining all of it, we can get to govern and manage this environment. So basically this is the idea of the cloud adoption framework. So when we say strategy, it's here on the screen, and I wouldn't, rather than reading back, but we understand it's just that business justification that gives the expected outcome. That was that business justification as to why we want to go to the cloud. Are we trying to move to the cloud to cut costs, or are we trying to move to the cloud because we want to ensure more availability because that's what is required of our environment? Then if that is the case, now why do we want to move? Now that we understand the why we need to move to the cloud and all, you need to plan. We need to plan, try to understand the existing environment or infrastructure we have and how it can, suit the cloud and all of those things, all those outcomes, visible outcomes that one can get. We plan for it. And the ready state is after the planning, that the assessment is being done and everything is ready with gotten the requirement or the prerequisite needed to move. That's the ready aspect. Then we can adopt, migrate, moving the existing workload that we have on premises to the cloud, or maybe it's a way of innovate whereby we have a new cloud native, or even bring about this hybrid solution of the coexistence of on-premises and cloud together. And once that is done, then of course the govern part as well. And finally, you manage all of these things, workload that you have in the cloud. So that's basically about the cloud adoption framework. And don't forget, I equally mentioned earlier that consists of documentation. We have what's it called? Brings about best practices. What are the best ways, to get things done to be able to achieve success and all? It's all part of the cloud adoption framework. Okay. Next here is privacy, compliance, and data protection. I think this is the last lesson, if I am not mistaken, for today, and I believe we should be able to cover that. That's, if I'm not mistaken, this should be the last lesson. And in here, we are going to talk about privacy, compliance, and data protection. So at the for this course, our objective domain here is we should be able to describe the purpose of the Microsoft core tenant of security, privacy, and compliance, the Microsoft privacy statements, online service term, as well as data protection amendments. Then the Trust Center talk about the purpose of the Azure as well. Okay. All right, so let's move on. Let's start with security, privacy, and compliance. So what are these security, privacy, and compliance? So basically, we start with what is security, okay? What is privacy, and all of these things. And when we say security, this is something I know fully well that Microsoft is doing so well to invest in. Microsoft is investing, as much as possible in the area of security. Okay, and it's really a big deal for Microsoft. Okay, so and the idea is just to protect our environment, uh, or against any known cyber threat, or even uh, any cyber threat whatsoever, any threat whatsoever, either using the automation or the artificial intelligence. That's what this security is about. And for privacy, this has to do with privacy of organization, of course, just like it's listed there, through different uh, contractual agreement, or even providing user control as well as transparency. We're still going to talk in depth about each of these. And finally, we have the compliance. Compliance, this is part where you have to, obey or fulfill the laws and regulation, where you have to comply to different rules. So depending on countries, some country has these rules, in place to be able to manage all of these or let's say the compliance of our environment. So all of these are basically important. And for compliance regulation, which we're going to still talk about, I'm sure some of them we know, the likes of ISO, their compliance, the likes of HIPPA, the likes of FERPA, and so on and so forth. We're going to look at each of them and equally talk about them, so to say. So those are the uh, for compliance needs. Now let's take a deep dive. Now for compliance terms and requirements. Now, this, like I was saying earlier, organizations, institution, any of these different sector that we have, data is something that is important to everyone. Okay, I would say data is the new gold, or I can even say data is the new currency. And I'm sure you would agree with me in that way. So government generally is working hard to protect people, and that's the reason why they have created different laws, or should I say they have created regulation. And the idea is just to protect data through different measures, whether it's granting users access to data from any time, or granting individual rights access to be able to modify their data whenever they need to, and so on and so forth. So but some of these regulations that organization as well as institution has put in place to work with what we have listed here on the screen. We have the Criminal Justice Information Service, we have the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Basically, those one are introduced on how health related information should be protected. Okay, we have the CSA star certification. We have the ISO. We have what's it called? EU model clauses, NIST. Now, all of this, for instance, the star, what's it called? The star certification for this, that's the CSA, and CSA is simply Cloud Security Alliance. That's what it means. So, for that, we have the likes of Azure, Intune, Microsoft Power BI, and all within Microsoft, they have all obtained this Cloud Security Alliance STAR certification. And this is done through this rigorous independent third-party assessment of cloud provider security posture. And this is something that has been achieved. We also have the EU model clauses, that's the European Union model clauses, and Microsoft usually offer customers the EU standard contractual clauses that provide this, guarantee around maybe transfer of personal data outside of EU. And so that is in play. We have the NIST as well. That's the National Institute of what's it called, Standard and Technology. So that's also, you know, it's more or less a voluntary framework, and it consists of both guidance as well as best practices and standard that helps manage cyber security related risk. That's what it does. So that's those are just some of the compliance offerings that Microsoft provide. We have a list of them, so to say. Sorry, we have a list. Not just it's not limited to what you see on the screen. Is what I'm saying. We have the likes of. Let me try and remember one. I think I talked about FE RPA is not listed here, but it's basically introduces rule to protect students' information, because what it means is the acronym is FERPA is the acronym for Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, and it's to protect students' information. Basically, that's what it is about. So we have different compliance regulation as well as offering. So let's move on. Let's move to a Microsoft privacy statement. Now, for Microsoft privacy statement, this we would understand, we try to understand. It explains, basically, I would say, personal data that Microsoft collects and how Microsoft uses it, and even for what purpose is it useful. Okay, that's what this Microsoft privacy statement is about. I'm sure you must have, for those of us that are opportunity to have written maybe Microsoft certification exam before you start, you would see, that statement letting you know that okay, when you do this, some of the maybe the score is collected for this, or all of those things, or maybe you join an event online, there's always that privacy statement. The only guilty thing is most of us don't read. We just go ahead and do acknowledge or accept or I agree. We are quick to click that check button of I agree. But no, this privacy statement actually they are in place, and it covers all our Microsoft services, whether it is the website or the apps or software or service devices, you know, different things like that. We have them in place, and basically it will provide information to that relates to specific products. Okay, whether the product is Windows or the product is Xbox, depending on what product it is, there is always a that privacy statement that provides information to us. So don't forget, again, it's going to privacy statement usually explains what personal data Microsoft is collecting, how Microsoft is using whatever they've collected and for what purpose. One thing I know is Microsoft is not going to collect your data and use it for advertisement, you know. No, rather they call it whatever data that has been collected from you is used for the purpose of, continuous improvement and how Microsoft can serve, its customers better and all. So that's just on the side. Now let's move on to the online service times. Okay, after that we'll talk about the DPA. Now for online service times, just from the name imply when we say all these terms and condition and all, in a way it's more or less a legal binding between Microsoft and customer here are usually you, or should I say organization, basically. So that's what OST is about, legal agreement. Okay, and we can apply this specifically to maybe any of the Microsoft online services that you have license. Maybe the license is through subscription. Now it's not limited to just Azure, even other technology like Dynamics, like Office 365, even Bing, because it's still part of Microsoft, it's owned by Microsoft. So this online service time is um, is a part of it. It's just an agreement so that tomorrow you don't come and say you want to sue Microsoft. You have signed an agreement basically. So you can't come and say, okay, Microsoft did this and you want to sue them. I'm sure Microsoft will show you to say, you see, you actually signed our online service time, or you agreed to our online service time. So we equally have data protection addendum, DPA, and this one just defines to us that data processing as well as security terms for online services. Now, the DPA usually will include things like our compliance with law. It includes disclosure of what's it called again? Process data. It includes data security, data transfer, and so on and so forth. And that's what this DPA is all about. Okay, moving on, let's talk about Trust Center. Trust Center. Now, Trust Center here basically showcases Microsoft principles, and that principle basically is for maintaining our data integrity in the cloud. So this is how Microsoft basically implement and support the security, privacy, compliance, transparency in all their Microsoft Cloud product and services. And the Trust Center is really important because this is what provides support and resources for both legal and compliance community. So that's what the Trust Center is about. Now, from the Trust Center, we can get in-depth information about security compliance. What is it again? Policies, features, practice across any of the Microsoft cloud environment. Also, we can have additional resources for different topics. From the Trust Center, we can have links to security, we can have links to privacy, we can have links to compliance blog, any upcoming event, and what have we. I think towards the end, we are also going to explore this Trust Center to understand more. So we'll see all of these different things for Trust Center. Let me see if I can okay, let me push that towards the end, please, so that I'll be able to cover this slide, if you don't mind. And if there's any walkthrough that we are missing, like I said, we'll dedicate a particular weekend, and all we do for that weekend is labs. No lecture, no discussion, just hands-on lab. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about Azure compliance documentation. Okay, and it's always don't forget we are doing basic, and for basic, what is this my Azure compliance documentation? Basically, it provides us with detailed documentation about legal and regulatory standard, as well as compliance in our Azure. I don't know, someone's mic is not muted. Kindly assist us to mute your mic so that we don't distract others on the call. Okay, so thank you for that. Let's move on. We're talking about, Azure compliance and documentation. And I said this provides us with, you know, detailed documentation about legal as well as regulatory standard, including the compliance on Azure. And of course, that's the documentation where we can find offering on different categories that we have listed on the screen. Category for ranging from global to US government to finance services. That's if you're talking about industry, finance, health, all of those uh, industries, whether it's media or manufacturing, all of that, I will still categorize it under industry. And then we also have regional as well. So these are things that we have, and we can always get this Azure compliance documentation here. Let me share with us the link to that, because 1 minute I want to put that in the meeting chat for us so that we can see that link, and I can equally bring it up as well for everyone to see on the call. So you can see this is what the Azure compliance documentation is like. Remember I talked about the offerings. Okay, remember I said the offering is ranging from global to US government to is it industry as well. And I said industry, we can have finance, we can have health, we can have media, manufacturing, other industry. See, we can have automotive education, and all of this I would say under industry. Then we have the region. You can see the different region: America, Asia Pacific, EMEA, and so on and so forth. So this are just Azure compliance documentation, and we have access to that based on the link I did share with us. Let's move on. Let's talk about Azure Sovereign Region. Azure Sovereign Region. Okay, so um, for Azure Sovereign Region, it's I'm trying to say how I can explain this further. So we have different region. We have that of US, we have that of China. I know we used to have that of Germany, and even based on their data center, they have their unique name as well. So I'll start with the Azure Sovereign Region for US. Now, Azure Government basically is a separate instance of the Azure service. Okay. And what this does is it's addressed strictly or specifically the security and compliance need for US federal agencies, US local governments, and solution providers. So it's specific to this US, specific to US government, so to say. With this, it offers physical isolation from non-US government deployment, as well as provider screened US personnel, so to say. So there's more or less like, a restriction way. Now, this Azure Government Service, basically it handles data that is subject to government regulation and requirements specifically. Okay, so things around maybe federal risk and authorization management program, or things around National Institute of Standard and Technology, or things around Internal Revenue Service or Department of Defense or Criminal Justice Information peculiar to government. That it gives that highest level of security and compliance. And of course, the Azure government uses the physical isolated data center and network, which means their own data center is unique and peculiar to just the US government. I don't know if you understand. So it's not using the general data center that is available for to all organization or available to all users, so to say. So that's that. So just the same way we have Azure Sovereign Region that is just US government, or should I say US government services, the same thing we now have for China as well. I'm sure that in China, you know that they have their own policy, they have their own regulation. For instance, I'm aware that WhatsApp does not work in China. They have, you know, their own social media, you know, platform or network, very unique to them and all. And before you can operate in China, you need an insider. You need to get, this approval and all of it before you can, do a business in China. They have strict laws, is my bone of contention here. And the Azure China, we call it the Azure China 21 ViaNet. Okay, this is operated by 21 ViaNet, and it's again just like the US. It's again physically separated instance of, excuse me, cloud services that is located in China. Now it is operated and transacted by the Shanghai Blue Cloud Technology, and they are the ones we refer to as 21 ViaNet. Now, this is owned by a subsidiary of the Beijing 21 ViaNet Broadband Data Center Co. Limited. Why am I giving these details? I'm giving the details so that you understand that for China, things are different, when it comes to China. And basically, these Azure services are based on, the same Azure that we have, or maybe it's, of 365 or Power BI and all of it. But the thing here is that there is Azure agreement as well as contract in China where applicable. So it's usually signed between customer and the 21 ViaNet. That's why I was giving details about what this ViaNet is about. Now, of course, we know that Azure include core component of the different service offering, the EAS, PaaS, and SaaS, and components like, the network, storage, data management, identity management, and all of these other services. So in essence, the what's it called, Azure China 21 VNet basically support most of these services that Global Azure has, and if you're already using maybe the Azure Global Service, if you want to operate in China, you have to still rehost and refactor some of the application and server. So what I'm saying in essence is probably you are in the Europe region, or anywhere, any country in Europe, and you have your service or business there, you've already subscribed to Azure, you have it working, you have your application running and all, and you decide, okay, I'm moving to China based on my product, my service, it's, something that we need to start or build a new office in China. So what I'm trying to explain is, if that is the case, despite the fact that you're already using this global Azure service, now because you're trying to operate newly in China, you have to rehost or maybe even refactor some of your application and services such that it can meet China's compliance. That's basically my explanation here. So they have their own unique data center. I think we usually refer to their own cluster as Mooncake, that of US. Think Fairfax, and there used to be Germany too, which was Dark Forest, so to say. So those are just the sovereign regions that, if we have any question, as we have come to the end of this training, after the question, we can go ahead to do um, maybe lab. Any question, please? This is time for question and answer. Any question? We still have about, 20 minutes, and we can do one or two labs within 20 minutes, but I would like to, take your questions, or if it's contribution and all. So while we are No, for the question and answer, I would like to announce that we have, a WhatsApp group for specifically for this Azure class, Textilers Azure group. Okay, I'll be posting the link here. So beyond our weekly training, if we have any question, if there's anything you need clarification, or if there's anything you want us to help you with and all, you can drop it in that WhatsApp group. So the WhatsApp group is for us to learn better and all, just strictly for Azure group. Okay, so permit me to quickly drop that link. 1 minute. I'm looking for the link again. I know I have the link somewhere. Let me share with us. Okay. But please don't go ahead and ask your question, please. I just want to quickly get the link while I'm waiting for questions or contributions or anything for this learning.
Are there any Nigerian compliance regulations, just the same way they have US, China? Are there anything that are specific to Nigeria?
Okay, we actually don't have Microsoft data center in Nigeria.
Okay, it has to do with the location of the data center, not the
Yes.
access.
So we don't have data center in Nigeria, basically. So I know India, for instance, they have this law that their data should reside within their country. So if you're within India and you're trying to operate, so you cannot say you want to have your data in the US or you want to have your data in UK. You need to have your data within India region. For Nigeria, we do not have. So basically what we leverage on is the Africa region. I know we have data center in South Africa and most of the time people leverage on Europe or US and all, but we do not have in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sorry, please, I've shared the link that you can use to join the WhatsApp group, and we can continue our learning from there. So thank you very much. In the absence of no further question, I'll go ahead to bring up my lab environment. Let's try to do one or two things. So I'll start with, based on the learning for today, I'll start with the RBAC rule. So how do we perform RBAC? So let's start from RBAC and we'll move on to do the others one after the other. Now for RBAC, and that has to do with, let's say, viewing and assigning roles. So how do we assign roles? First of all, we need to go ahead to sign in to our Azure portal. Once we sign into the Azure portal and all, we can go to all services. Okay, these are the steps. Now, don't forget that all of these steps, I have it documented. It's in our channel. So the file tab in our channel, you have all the step-by-step guide of all these labs that I go through in class. Okay, so back to our back. Once we have that done, basically we go to resource group and create a resource group. But in this instance, I'm not going to create a new resource group. The textiles resource group I created, what I did is at the end of the learning, I had to clean up. What that means is I deleted all the resources because it was incurring charges, for me, especially when I'm not using them. They're just tests and all. So this time around, I can just maintain um, an existing resource group. So that's my test resource group. That's a name given to it. Now that we have that, we can now go to access control for that resource group. We call it access control, identity and access management, IAM. Okay, so here we can add a role assignment. Okay, so we can give role assignment. I can decide to say, okay, I want to give a particular user owner role to this resource group, or I want to give contribution role to this resource group. So these are all these built-in roles. We call all of these built-in roles because we already have the roles in place. So I can decide, okay, I want to assign owner role. Okay. And once I click owner, so we have different ones. Owner, this owner, basically what it means is I'm giving full access to manage all the resources, and they have the ability to also assign roles in Azure Harbor. So basically those things I can do, whoever I'm assigning this role to will be able to do same, specifically for the resource group. So I'll click next, and here, am I assigning to user, or am I assigning to group, or security principal? Or I want to assign based on managed identity. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, we can have that in place. So once that is done, I'm going to stick to just users or group. Now I can select members. In here I have members. I think I'll just select my other accounts here, and I'll do select. Okay, so I've selected one of my other account. I can add description, permission to test. Okay, what's the name again? My test RG. Okay, that's just a simple description. I can click next. So next thing here is to review and assign. I can see the scope. The scope is based on resource group, and I've given to a specific resource group. So I can go ahead to review and assign. So it's going to add that as a role assignment to me. And we can do this for users or groups in the environment, depending on the scope, whether it's the management group or based on subscription. So you can actually assign our back role to a specific subscription, just the same way you go to that particular subscription. From the blade, you would see the access control IAM, then you can assign maybe owner or contribution or reader, any of the built-in rule to users within your environment. Now, this user can be employee of your department, or it can even be a guest from a different organization. Depending on what you need this guest to do within your environment, then you can assign access control. Don't forget that the access control gives you that room for specific the specific access to get job done. That's for IAM. Now, still on this IAM, we can check out the activity log. Okay. Now, the activity log is showing that a while ago, there was a right role assignment a while ago. Okay, let me try to see if I can filter this and try. Let me add sorry, I want to add filter. Let me change this to operation, and I want it to load. Let me try and see create role. Okay, so you can see based on what I've just done, it will help me to see the activity that that was carried out before, and you can see as time goes on, based on the time we spend, it to keep increasing to say this was done a while ago and all, and I'm sure we can see the date, that's a timestamp, and who initiated it, which is me. I initiated this rule. Now you can equally delete any back role assignment that you put in place. So it's as simple as that, for role assignment. Okay, so another thing that we talked about today, besides our back, was trust center. And I said for the trust center, we are going to just navigate through the trust center to C. Okay, so let me also bring that up. Let me bring that up to us. 1 minute. I'll put the link for us as well in the meeting chat so that we can have that in place. And let me bring it up here too. Okay, so this is what the trust center looks like. Okay, and for the trust center, let's explore. We can see we have privacy. Let me drop down privacy overview, data management, GDPR resources. If I go to compliance, you can see the compliance overview, compliance offering, regional country, cloud service disability, can see product and services industry, then specifically tools and documentation. Remember when I was talking about Trust Center, I'm sure you've not forgotten, and I said basically our Trust Center, we can have tools, so to say, and we can have documentation within that Trust Center. I mentioned that to us for trust center. So this is what we basically, have here. This is what the site looks like for Azure. So we have trust center, that of Azure, technology M365, Dynamics 365, Power Platform, and maybe any other services that we have. Now let's go to 1 minute. Let's see what else we can explore in here. Okay, so we have the Azure, we have security and compliance. Let me see. Compliance overview. And all. So basically, it will require me to sign in. Let me even sign in properly. Okay, all right. Been able to sign in, and if you notice from my what's it called, trust center, after signing in, when I clicked, it brought me to my Microsoft of 365, which means from the trust center I can access my compliance center from this trust center. So that's one of things for this trust center. So another thing is, let's see if I can, let me go back. I want to navigate back to, this documentation. 1 minute. I want to go back to the trust center. Okay, maybe I should just bring in another page. I want us to look at, for Trust Center, we talked about Microsoft's compliance offering. Okay, so I want us to talk about go to that compliance offering one more time. Now, we remember we said we have different category for global, US, the industry, and we have regional. Now, in here, I want us to go through let's say global US, and let's see if we can access ISO. Okay, so let's do ISO 27. Let's do this let's do this global rather than US. Let's do global for ISO 27201. Basically, I just want us to explore. So this is where it brings us. Don't forget, this has to do with documentation and all. And also we can go to, the, hello, Also, we can also navigate to the what's it called, service trust within that page. I'll equally share that link with us. And we can see we can go to the compliance manager, we can go to any of the audit report, data protection stack, industry and region. This is the trust center that we initially viewed. We can also access that again. Then we have resources, and this is what the page looks like, for this service trust. I don't know if we have any question, as I'm going to stop here for now. Again, we have other, labs that we are going to do. But yes, we have come to the end of module 5. Next week, we will do module 6. And the week after, we are going to focus on just labs. No training, no lecture, no discussion, just labs. Okay, let me say there is discussion. We can discuss during the lab, but it's just lab. So thank you for your time. Once again, any question?
Hi, Tosin. Thanks for the class.
Thank you.
I want to ask how I can get an Azure subscription, maybe free trial, so that I can follow up with the labs.
Okay, I did mention, I think at the beginning of our training, and if you don't mind, you can refer to our first class. You could use the my.visualstudio.com, and with that, you'll be able to access my.visual. Let me type it in the meeting chat. visualstudio.com. But then it will require you to include your credit card, and $1 will be deducted. But just a month trial basically. After 1 month, you'll be charged. But to avoid charges, you'll be advised to cancel, that subscription, and your initial $1 will be refunded back to you. I've done that many times, and yes, I do get my refund back. Now, based on your bank, the refund might be slow, might not get it on time, maybe at the day you cancel, but you will eventually get it back. If you don't mind, so that we don't spend beyond our time on the call, we can take it up and continue from our WhatsApp group. That's why I dropped the link to join the WhatsApp group, and we can discuss our concern, question we have, things we are trying to do, and we can equally help each other, from that platform.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so thank you everyone for your time, and I hope we're able to learn one or two things. Please, let's continue on the WhatsApp group. If you have any question, feel free. There's no stupid question. There's no stupid answer. We're all together to learn. We're all, there together to learn. You might post things about, news or updates. For instance, we just concluded Ignite. It could be something that you want to inform the house, bring the house into awareness and all. That is welcome into the group. But strictly for Azure, again, strictly for Azure learning. That's what the group is about. So at this juncture, I would like to say thank you all for your time, and see you next week.
Okay, thank you. Have a good weekend.
And you too. Thank you.